Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the November 14th, 2022 meeting of the General Obligation Bond Executive Committee. I hereby call the meeting to order. I would like to start with introducing our Spanish interpretation.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman, and good morning. Hello, my name is Mario Barajas, and I'll be serving as today's Spanish interpreter. I'll now take a moment to introduce myself to our Spanish-speaking audience. Hola, buenos días. Mi nombre es Mario Barajas y estaré sirviendo hoy como intérprete a los de habla hispana. De antemano se les pide, si es que van a dar un comentario público, por favor hable despacio, con claridad y evite tener distracciones de fondo. Finalmente, pause después de cada una o dos oraciones para que se le pueda interpretar lo que está diciendo de la manera más completa posible. Muchas gracias. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you as well. Before we proceed with the agenda, I'm pleased to say that Mayor Kate Gallego has joined us here in the chambers this morning. Mayor Gallego, would you like to say a few words while you're here?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As we are nearing the end of the Executive Committee's work in this Phase 1, we just wanted to come and thank you on behalf of the City Council and myself. It has been a wonderful process so far. It's been inspiring to see all the good work that is happening in the city. We've had our residents very engaged. They think this process matters and is worthy of their time. Our imaginations, I think, have been captured by what's possible with this bond. So I wanted to say thank you for balancing so many needs. This is the fastest growing city in the country. There are so many great projects that we could undertake. I think you've done a good job thinking about the future of the city while reinvesting in areas that need attention. I know the council gave financial parameters that did not lead to a tax increase, and we want to thank you for considering that. We also really appreciate that you balancing the needs of the entire city. I'm hopeful people in every single part of our community will be excited about this bond and want to support it. It will make a difference on so many levels. You all are top community leaders. You could do anything with your time, and it's a real compliment to the city that you have chosen to serve on this body. I also want to thank our residents who keep participating, who've come up with great ideas, who've given input and have so much passion for this process. It's clear to me that we're going to need another bond. As soon as this one passes the voters, we need to start thinking about that. I'm very glad that our city manager has thought through this process and really considered that we need to do bonds at more regular junctures because we are a growing, changing city and we have to keep investing. I'm a firm believer that part of the reason we are as successful as we are is we've made these types of capital investments. Our voters have a record of supporting us and seeing that this makes a difference, that partnering with the city does make their lives better. I know you still have a lot of work to do, but we're on great momentum, and I just thought it would be an appropriate time to say thank you for what you have done for our city and continue to do. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, that was wonderful. Thank you very much.
And I would be remiss if I did not thank our amazing staff who have balanced so many things, thought long term, and we have a great team here. They are also still getting started, but it's good to check in at this point and celebrate we have already accomplished a lot. So can we do a round of applause for Team Phoenix? And now good luck with hard decisions ahead.
Thank you. I would say that on behalf of all of us, it's been an honor to serve on this committee, and all of the committee chairmen have been so involved and so engaged, and it's been amazing to work with the city staff who are extremely accomplished, and it's been a great opportunity. So our thanks as well. Let's go back now to our agenda. And I'll go through the plans for the meeting. There will be a public comment period during item 3 of today's agenda. To ensure that the committee can complete its work, I'll be limiting speakers to 1 minute each. Speakers will not be allowed to pool time. I'm also asking that organizations select only one of their members to speak on behalf of the organization. If you are attending in person and would like to speak, you need to sign up at the kiosk outside the doors here. If you're attending virtually and would like to speak at a future meeting, you'll be able to do that by signing up at least 2 hours in advance. So next, and the first agenda is the approval of the minutes of the Executive Committee meeting on November 7th.
So moved, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Second.
Those in favor, please let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
So moved. Thank you. Our next agenda item will go over a little bit of what we've been accomplishing. During our October 31st meeting, the Executive Committee adopted the City Manager's recommended targets as a starting point for reducing the Subcommittee's $717 million recommendation down to the $500 million program limit. Targets were adopted with flexibility. Prior to finalizing our recommendations, we do still have the ability to adjust within a subcommittee or to adjust targets between subcommittees. Over the past 2 meetings, we've reduced 5 subcommittee recommendations down to those targets. We will complete that process today by first exploring options for the Parks Subcommittee as directed by the committee at the last meeting, and then moving to the recommendations for the Arts and Culture and Economic Development and Education subcommittees. We will then hear public comments. After public comment, I anticipate we will be able to finalize our recommendations and make any needed balancing adjustments. If necessary, we can complete this work at our last scheduled meeting on Thursday, but I'm hopeful that we could potentially conclude today. During our last meeting, we asked staff to review possible options to reduce the Parks and Recreation Subcommittee recommendation by $4 million down to the target. I will start by asking staff to provide an update.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Executive Committee. At the direction of the Executive Committee, staff worked with the Budget and Research Department to see what could be done to find other sources of funding to close the gap to get to the target of $64 million. Just last week, the city received $500,000 from the Phoenix Suns that could be applied to the Esteban Recreation Center. Additionally, staff evaluated the Parks and Preserve Fund and Capital Program to determine if capacity would be available in the outer years to provide an additional $4 million in funding. Based on anticipated increases in resources, the staff recommends that this funding source could be used to offset costs for the Estrella Civic Space Phase 1.
Thank you. May I ask, Chairman?
Thank you, and thank you, staff, for doing all this work. We have difficult decisions, as we all know, and it was very hard to keep within budget, but the $4 million will help tremendously that we found. And having heard all the conversation from the past meeting about the Hants Park project, I asked staff to look again at the South Mountain Roadway and would like Parks and Recreation Director Cynthia Aguilar to explain about a phasing strategy for South Mountain Roadway would look like to provide a small amount of funding for Hants Park development. Cynthia, can you explain that?
Sure. Good morning, members of the Executive Committee. I'm Cynthia Aguilar, Parks and Recreation Director, and we have taken a closer look at the South Mountain Roadway Safety Project. We feel that $3 million for the project would still allow us to do some critical work. That would include a phased plan that would allow us to first do a study for all the roadway work that is needed throughout South Mountain, and then it would also allow us to do preliminary design, and we believe construction of approximately 3 miles of roadway to get us started on that project.
Okay, thank you very much, Cynthia. With the information that staff has provided, I would like to make a motion to accept the staff findings and reduce the bond request for Esteban Recreation Center by $500,000, reduce the funding for Estrella Civic Space Phase 1 by the $4 million, replacing both with the funds as identified by staff. if staff could put that up on the board, it'll clearly show people who are watching. We're not reducing them, but staff did find the money. Additionally, I would like to reduce the South Mountain roadway by $3 million. As Cynthia described the phasing, we could do this, giving Hance Park Development $3 million and staying within the $64 million target. I'll put that in the form of a motion.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Let me ask if there are any questions or comments from the members of the committee. If not, I'll call for the vote. Those in favor, please let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Did we have someone opposed? No. So moved. Thank you. And thank you, Chairman Wilcox. Thank you, staff.
Thank you, staff.
We will now begin the deliberation process, and I would like to start with arts and culture.
And Chairwoman Harper, just for clarification, I did not vote on that last motion since I had to abstain from previous discussion about the Hance Park piece. So, okay.
Thank
Excellent.
you for clarifying.
Of course. Well, as staff makes their way to the table, I'll share that I don't believe we have a presentation because as we learned from the memos we received prior to our last meeting, there are no alternate funding sources for arts and culture. But would still like to have a dialogue, of course, with our Deputy City Manager, Inger Erickson, and Mitch Menchaca, our Arts and Culture Director, as there are a couple of items that I'd like for him to share more information about with us, as well as any, obviously, questions or further information through our deliberation. 3 quick but important points before opening up the discussion. Arts and culture contribute to the economic development of our city. Phoenix has become a creative city with downtown at the center of it. When a city invests in arts and culture, it attracts more residents, students, and businesses, and leads to the private sector also following suit. The incorporation of arts and culture in the public realm creates a competitive advantage for businesses in their attraction and retention of talent. We know this to be true in downtown through testimonials from business leaders, as well as the economic impact studies that have been commissioned over the years. Funding all the arts and culture recommendations on screen, or which will be on screen soon, will produce a true return on investment for the city with no increase to operating costs. And secondly, I hear over and over again from visitors and new residents in Phoenix how accessible our arts and culture opportunities are here. We need to keep them accessible to everyone, and funding the projects again on screen will be another demonstration of realizing equity through this bond program. For all but one, I believe, of the prioritized critical needs recommended by the Arts and Culture Subcommittee, the city has or will have operating agreements with the nonprofits programming these city buildings. It's because of bond programs like this that the city can generously offer city buildings as venue spaces for arts and culture nonprofits. And it's because of these operating agreements that the nonprofits then are able to serve our entire community with incredible and enriching programs at low to even no cost. The nonprofits fundraise and pursue grant funding in order to do so. By funding the truly critical repairs and renovations that the city buildings need for the nonprofits to continue operating inside of them, we will keep arts and culture accessible to everyone and help the nonprofits continue to serve the entire community. And my last point is just more of a reminder. We're asking for just a 2.8% increase from the recommended 10% with no increase to operating costs. And I could argue that a few of the projects could have or should have, again, landed at other subcommittees. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mitch and Inger in case you had any opening comments, or we can start the dialogue.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Executive Committee. We're happy to answer any questions on this, what's presented forward.
Chairman Harper, if I may start, one just wanted to confirm that there are no alternate funding sources for at least any of the, for arts and culture in the way that we received memos from other departments showing that there are alternate funding sources to consider.
Madam Chair, members of the Executive Committee, for the projects that we put forward, there are no alternative funding sources. We don't have a 3PI program. We don't have earned revenue fees. For items like the cultural facilities, critical equipment replacements, we will have to find that within our regular budget or our 5-year maintenance budget. We are on a schedule when things come to end of life, like air conditioners or electrical panels, the non-sexy things, if you will, of a building, but those things would have to be found within the city's regular budgeting process.
Other questions or comments?
Madam Chair, I just have one. It strikes me that maybe 100% of these projects is leveraged by fundraising of some sort by a private entity. Maybe the Latino Cultural Center might be the exception to that because it's not yet an entity that the city, I don't know if any of the others do or not, but could you just look at that and see, are all of those organizations already fundraising in addition to the city money that is being considered?
Madam Chair, members of the Executive Committee, yes, those organizations that have presented projects or that we have worked with our tenants are currently fundraising for their own capital projects, and this goes above and beyond their own scope of their fundraising. And with this, these funds can also leverage private support. And we heard from the Children's Museum that if the building were to be renovated, there are funders that are willing to help offset exhibition costs, programming costs for those new spaces. So there's even an investment beyond this, but there are capital campaigns currently being done by some of these projects.
Great, thank you very much. My question was geared toward just thinking out loud about, is there a way to fund more of the projects by asking some of the projects higher up in the process to, just raise a little more than they're already raising to meet the gap? And again, I'm not suggesting that because I'm not sure that should be the priority, but it could be a way to sort of spread out the bond money among more projects. But being on boards of nonprofits, I know that their fundraising goals are already very, very challenging, and so putting that additional burden on them may be problematic for getting the project done. I just don't know, but it's just a thought process I wanted to throw out there.
Just to add, I guess, a comment to that, I would hope that we would use that as a reason to support funding these projects, that these nonprofits are every day fundraising, pursuing grant funding. It's blood, sweat, and tears that allow them to operate. I work with many of them, running Downtown Phoenix Inc., so I know many of them personally. And it's a labor of love at times with the monies that they do raise. So I hope that we use that as support for funding these programs versus as a detraction from it. And Mitch, just because I did reference operating agreements, maybe just for clarification purposes, generally what does that mean?
Sure. Madam Chair, members of the Executive Committee, we have operating agreements with most of these facilities that we own but do not operate. So a nonprofit tenant is in charge of the programming, the administration, different parts of the operations of the facility depending on when that operating agreement was drafted. Many of these folks have leases that go 50, 60 years into the future. And so it is a partnership between the city and the nonprofit. So that way, the city doesn't, like other municipalities, take on the operating costs of trying to run a museum or a theater company. So we have varying different operating agreements with these organizations.
And I do have one more question about an alternate funding source through this bond program. I admittedly was not fully aware of the 1% for any vertical development. I thought it was only at a previous meeting only within the Economic Development Subcommittee, but for clarification, it's for every project that is built through this bond program or only through the Economic Subcommittee?
Madam Chair, Member Press, yes, that's correct. The Percent for Art program would apply to all programs that it's applicable to throughout for every subcommittee.
And is that for programming only moving forward, or could it be for some of these capital needs? And is there a way? No.
It would be for the capital costs, so design and build of facilities.
So is there an opportunity to fund some of this over budget?
So Chairwoman Harper and Member Prius, I think what you're asking is, Can the percent for arts program funds that would be tied to each program within the other categories be applied to offset costs within this program? And the answer to that is no. That those percent for arts projects are attached to the individual project themselves, so they're a component of producing public art for those individual projects.
Which is also very important. Thank you for that clarification. Okay.
Other comments? I think this committee, like every committee we've had, has struggled with getting into the parameters of the base budget, and I think that's what your recommendation is going to be. But I think the discussion also shows the interest, if there is flexibility or other opportunities, that we would continue to pursue those. Other comments? Otherwise, I'd ask the chairman to make a motion.
I can't say that I'm prepared to make a motion other than funding the 12.8%. I would really look to this executive committee to help us get to that 10%. The direction from the Arts and Culture Subcommittee was we recommend this 12.8% of the $500 million, and the executive committee will need to help us figure out how to reduce to whatever amount we need to get to. So we did prioritize. What you're seeing on screen is what we utilize. I should say we utilized the SurveyMonkey to prioritize the projects. What you're seeing on screen, we reduced any that we thought were scalable down to an amount that would still allow the project to move forward. So I would, again, look to this subcommittee, perhaps further the discussion around funding all 9 projects, or if we need to reduce, again, they are prioritized on screen.
Just so it's clear for everyone, what we have on the screen shows that you can be within the proposed budget with the rankings of 1 through 5. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, just to clarify, the target would be the $50 million. So you could actually include projects 1 through 6. You'd be slightly over, about $238,000.
I think as we've done with the other committees, we've talked about whether some of these are scalable, where part of it could find a second round in the next bond election. Could we comment on that?
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, I can speak on number 9. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we don't have a fund to help offset some of these costs. Our original proposal early on in the capital needs was $14 million, and then it was presented as 10 to the Arts and Culture Subcommittee, and we did scale down to 5, knowing that we would have to find those monies in our general fund or 5-year maintenance budget. The same with Symphony Hall and the Herberger. Those were higher totals, but Convention Center was able to find some funds to offset some of those costs as well. So these are scaled down even more from when originally presented.
So under this premise, you don't see a path to including 7 through 9 in any percentage?
I will say that as an arts person, we're happy to take what we can into this. What is happening, as mentioned with those operating agreements, part of our agreement with our tenants is end of life. And so we have several projects from the 06 bond where they're, again, HVAC systems and things like that are coming to end of life. And the bond program helps us be proactive in that scheduling versus reactive when things would break down. So we would have to identify which would be scalable. Again, they are on a schedule. We could take the earlier things off the list first, given whatever amount given to us. I do have my colleague John Chan from the Phoenix Convention Center that can talk about Symphony Hall and the Herberger Theater Center, as the Office of Arts and Culture does not manage those facilities.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. Happy to answer any questions, but the 2 items pertaining to the theater venues, Symphony Hall and Herberger Theater, those are essentially maintenance items and repair items and equipment items that are addressing deficiencies in the venue or addressing equipment that's reached the end of its useful life. So the challenge that we're having with the outdated lighting and sound equipment is that because of its age, we can't get technical support, we can no longer get replacement parts. So we're really trying to hold things together until we're able to replace these items. So that's the biggest challenge, is that the risk of, equipment failures at any given time.
Would you say that process is different than what you had originally envisioned when the city put the original plan together?
Madam Chair, these items are obligations of the city. At this point in time, they're not programmed in our 5-year CIP, but as we look to facilitate these projects, we are able to, assist with the cost of these projects by $3 million for Symphony Hall and $2 million for the Herberger. This would be done by reprioritizing items in our 5-year CIP. So what that means is that there could be other projects that we'll have to defer, in order to accomplish these.
Chairman Pruce, I'm wondering if you might consider making a recommendation similar to what Chairman Mary Rose Wilcox did, to meet the budget, but to have this further investigation about some additional funds and give staff time to perhaps define that a little bit more.
I would be willing to consider that if it's a possibility. I mean, when we look at an arts and culture budget and there just isn't alternate funding sources, but I know for two of the three, it is under the convention center. But for that last item, I mean, there are many projects, again, that have end of life, necessary repairs, that there just won't be funding for those if it's cut. I mean, this is why it's been such a challenge. And I really, trust the wisdom of the subcommittee, the members. They're experts within arts and culture, historic preservation, the community as a whole. And it's again why this has just been such a challenge for us. I mean, we're talking accessibility, equity, representation, remembrance, all being addressed through this subcommittee. So I don't know if I'd turn that question to staff. Is it possible, do we think, to find some alternate funding? If there's a possibility there, yes, I'd be willing to.
Thank you. Chairman Torres?
Oh yeah, my question is very similar. You got to it at the very end of that. And my question was if staff could explain again why some of these projects don't have alternate funding. Is it just because they are too newly proposed and they have not been taken to the community yet to find out if there is potential for funding and investment in these types of facilities? Is it just too early of a stage?
I'll answer part of that question, Committee Member Torres. So the alternate funding sources that you hear us talking about in other areas of this whole entire bond program are either tax-supported revenues that come in that support specific areas, or they're allocations within a department that has oversight of a particular function. And so similar to what John is talking about, the only area that you really have any flexibility on in this particular area would be his 5-year CIP that he uses to manage those cultural facilities that he's over. So it would require him to essentially reconfigure his CIP. So if these things are urgent, or if a more urgent need comes up, he would just simply have to reprioritize and push something out. It's really about, moving things around within the amount of money that he has available. There really are no additional funding sources available for arts and culture at this point in time.
And Madam Chair, I guess that's why I again look to our executive committee just for this discussion, as we've now heard from every but one of subcommittees, maybe rebalancing or repositioning that perspective where, these are true critical needs that we have in our community. These arts and culture venues and organizations aren't able to function if we don't have these critical needs met, and I don't know that we can wait another 5 years. So when I think about some of our previous subcommittee discussions, are those true critical needs versus what we're talking about right now? And can we have a broader discussion around the $500 million, and is there a way to maybe push a little bit more towards arts and culture?
I think what I'd recommend at this point is I'd like to see us get a motion and vote on at least getting this on the table within the parameters that we have been given. We will, at the end of this meeting and potentially into the next meeting if we need to, talk about flexibility, talk about some movement within the different committees. I don't know where that will go, but we do need to get a premise in place. So that's why I'm recommending that you consider a motion for our chairman to consider voting on within the framework like the other committees have done, each of them struggling as well, but it gets us to the next level where we can have the discussion that you're suggesting. Chairman Wilcox.
Just a question. I know how hard this is and how important especially 7 and 8 are to the community. But you do have about 1.8 million still available. Could we possibly fund the Arizona Jewish Historic Society renovation to that amount in order to put it forward? I don't have any idea what that would do to the project, but at least it would be using the funds that you're allocated. And if we do in the second discussion have more funds available, they could be added in. So, and maybe my math is wrong, but my understanding is there's still about 2 million available.
So Chairwoman Harper, Member Wilcox, to your point, I believe consistent with what Budget and Research Director Amber Williamson said, as currently constructed, if you go through project number 6, which would include the Jewish Historical Society renovation and expansion project, you're at 50.2 million. So just about $238,000 over. So to your point, yes, you could fund it up to 1.8, or you could look to take that 238 out of someplace else to still stay within that target of $50 million. But that would mean 7, 8, and 9 don't get funded, is what that would mean.
A suggestion to, put it on the table.
Other comments, recommendations?
Madam Chair, is there anything scalable here that we can bring into the 6th year or to that effect? Is there on any of these projects?
I would defer to staff, to Mitch and John on that. I do think that the path that John laid forward is probably your most flexible piece at this point in time, but then that means we've got to figure out something else on the back end of that, but I'll defer to them.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, or members of the executive committee, we have looked at potentially scaling some of these projects. The Symphony Hall improvements, there is one component of that, which is the video equipment. That could potentially be scaled and deferred to a later time. However, looking at those numbers, that amounts to about $820,000, which is less than 10% of the total project. So while that's something that could be scaled, it really doesn't address the overall scope of the project and the need. In terms of a question that was raised earlier about the timing and whether or not these are new items, I can tell you that the Symphony Hall acoustical improvements that are needed were first identified to staff in 2015. It was brought by the resident companies as a need that they asked the city to address. Of course, at the time, there was not the capacity to address those, so we've been essentially waiting till a future bond program, and here we are at that point in time. The Herberger Theater items, again, those are all reach the end of its useful life at the same time, so I cannot recommend carving out and deferring some components of that project until a later time.
Other comments? Well, I think our goal here is to at least make a recommendation. The committee can vote on that. Like the other subcommittees, we have accomplished doing it within the framework of the recommendation. Later in this meeting, we will come back to address where there could be flexibility within this committee itself or moving around between the committees. So I think at this point, that would be our choice.
Does it have to be me that makes the motion? May I make a motion that we fund all 9 projects? I mean, obviously we can vote against it. I said, may I make a motion that we fund the $64 million and find the money elsewhere, or?
I think what we're suggesting is make the motion within the parameters, as we have done on other committees over these last several meetings, and then with that caveat to continue to look to see what we can do to find that.
And that I do understand. Obviously, I feel pretty strongly I'm advocating for these downtown projects, and the only other 2, downtown projects, when we talk about geographical equity as well, the only other 2 downtown projects that have been cut are Hans Park, which I know we just brought back $3 million for, and the Parsons Center. So I just hope that, I trust the other members of this executive committee that we can have further discussion once we adopt with flexibility, because I do think that we need to be able to consider across committees in order to fund the most critical needs put forward by the community and, of course, our subcommittee chairs. So I'll make a motion to fund the first 6 projects as they were prioritized by the Arts and Culture Subcommittee with flexibility.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any other discussion before I call for the vote?
Madam Chair, I either need to declare conflict on the whole motion or we need to separate out the Valley Youth Theater item, because I did mention earlier that I have a potential conflict related to that. So either way you want to do it is fine.
Do you recommend that staff recommend that we take that out, and then we can come back for that where Rick can be excused then? So if we could modify the motion to everything except Valley Youth Theater for this first vote, and then he'll be able to vote.
Madam Chair, you can do either. You can take the item out and then vote, or you can vote with the item in, and then Mr. Neymar would recuse himself.
And I'm okay either way. However you all want to handle it, I just would have to abstain from this
Mr.
motion.
Chairman. Just kidding. Thank you. Let's do it that way. Thank you, sir.
Let me ask one more process clarification question. So we'll vote on this, we'll vote on the Arts and Culture Subcommittee, we'll hear public comment, and then we'll come back to finalize our amounts across the board. Is that accurate?
Well, we are also going to hear the Economic Education Committee first, then we'll go to public comment, then we will come back to that discussion. That is correct. We have a motion and a second. Other comments? Those in favor, please let it be known by saying aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Thank you. The minute will reflect that Chairman Neymark abstained from Valley Youth Theater vote. Thank you. We're now going to move to the Subcommittee, Economic Development and Education, and I'd like to turn this over to Chairman Reed.
Good morning. While city staff moves to the front, my name is Robin Reed. I'm the president and CEO of the Black Chamber of Arizona. I'm also the chairman of the Economic Development and Education Subcommittee. The Economic Development and Education Subcommittee's goals were to look at ways to continue to drive the stellar growth we've seen in Phoenix over the last decade. I think we could all agree that we've seen the quality of jobs and redevelopment over the past few years move Phoenix into the forefront as a global competitor. As the Economic Development and Education Subcommittee looked at the options before us, we all agreed that the most important thing we could do was help to continue to give Phoenix a seat at the table to ensure that this quality growth continues, that our growth continues to help revitalize our communities and to execute on any number of community-led plans that have been created over the decades, plans our community members have been waiting for. I would now turn it over to Ms. Ginger Spencer, Deputy City Manager with oversight of community and economic development. Ms. Spencer.
Thank you, Committee Chairman Reed, Chairwoman Harper, and excuse me, members of the Executive Committee. Good morning. The what am I trying to say here? The Economic and Education Committee met on 3 different occasions. When we first started the process, we had one priority project, which was the Rio Reimagine project, and that was recommended at $23.5 million. We also had 3 projects that we included for future capital needs. Those 3 projects, one was for Arizona State University at $15 million. Another one was for our Spark land acquisition project, which was also at $5 million, and then our Spark land acquisition program that was at $5 million. So that totaled $46.05 million. When we presented to you at the last time, at the direction of our chairman, Committee Member Reed, he had recommended that we meet the city manager's recommended target of $38 million. At $38 million, that represents 7% of the recommended $500 million bond program. So in order to reach that $38 million, what we are recommending is that our Rio Reimagine project move forward at $23.5 million, that our Arizona State University project move forward at $12 million, and that our Spark area land acquisition project move forward at $2.5 million, correction on that one, $2.5 million. And then we would only move forward with those 3 projects at this time. The 4th project, which was the Economic Development Public Infrastructure Project that was originally recommended at $5.05 million, we do have alternative funding sources for that project. So in our Director Christine Mackey's budget, in her capital improvement program, we have $40 million that is budgeted over 2 funds over 5 years. So that is basically $8 million annually that we have in alternative funding sources. In addition to that, we also have another $2 million in one-time funding through the ARPA funding source. And so that is our recommendation today, that we move forward with the $38 million for the 3 projects, which would include, again, Rio Reimagine, Arizona Health Technology Center, and also Spark land acquisition. And with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Let me ask the committee members if they have questions or comments. Any thoughts? If not, Chairman Reed, would you like to make a motion? Are we ready for that?
Yes, thank you. Members of the Executive Committee, I would like to move that the allocated funds as indicated by Ms. Spencer for Rio Reimagined, ASU Health Technology Center, and Spark land acquisition totaling $38 million be approved by this committee.
Second.
A second. Open for comment.
Madam Chair, same problem. I have a conflict with the ASU item, and so I will recuse myself from voting.
We'll handle it the same way then as we did the last one. Other comments? Chairman Wilcox.
Just a comment. Staff, thank you very much. These are such important projects that the alternative funding really comes in well. So thank you for looking for them. Our community depends a lot, particularly small businesses, on these. So thank you very much.
Other comments?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Chairman James.
Again, I concur. I really appreciate you finding the fundings for this. This is excellent. This is very, I have to commend you on this. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I could just share, I just want to say thank you to city staff and to stakeholders for these initiatives, for working so quickly to meet the city manager's recommendation. It was really just an all hands on deck, and I really appreciate it.
Other comments? Well, let's call for the vote then. Those in favor, please let it be known by saying aye.
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 Abstain? For ASU?
Yep.
Opposed? Thank you. The motion carries. Great work. Thank you. And thanks to all of the city staff. You've just been amazing on this process. There might be more work to come. We're now going to move to the public comment period of the agenda item. I'd like to start that with asking the city attorney to please explain the rule of public comment in the Go Bond committee meetings.
Members of the public may speak to comment on the general obligation bond program. The City Code requires speakers to present their comments in a respectful and courteous manner. Profane language, threats, or personal attacks on members of the public, council members, or committee members or staff are not allowed. A person who violates these rules will lose the opportunity to continue to speak. The committee and staff cannot discuss or comment on matters relating to pending claims or litigation.
Thank you very much. We have 27 speakers registered. 7 are virtual. We're going to begin with the virtual speakers, so I'd like to turn this over to staff now to begin this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our first virtual speaker is Lisa Perez, followed by Nicole Rodriguez. Lisa, are you on the line?
I'm here.
Okay, you may proceed. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, you may proceed. You may proceed, Lisa. Okay, we may come back to Lisa. We've lost her. Our next speaker is Nicole Rodriguez. Nicole, are you on the line?
I am. Good morning. May I go ahead and proceed?
Yes.
So I'm here to discuss and support for Vision Zero and the equity-based mobility program to increase the funding at least back to its original slated amount that the subcommittee proposed. Vision Zero supports our most vulnerable folks. Vision Zero supports making housing more affordable. It supports a reduction in the workload of our police and fire. Vision Zero encourages and increases private development, which brings impact fees and increased tax revenue to pay for infrastructure such as streets, trees, drainage, lighting. Vision Zero improves urban livability and reduces carbon emissions. Vision Zero creates improved access to parks, libraries, the arts and culture. It makes affordable transportation options safe for folks just trying to get to their jobs and schools. And safe routes to schools is critical. Vision Zero and the equity-based mobility program are dignity programs for areas that have been well underserved for way too long. We do not have enough money as it is for them. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Stephanie Vasquez, followed by Jim McPherson. Stephanie, are you on the line? Okay, she is not on the line. Our next speaker is Jim McPherson, followed by Amy Esposito. Jim, are you on the line?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, you may proceed.
Great. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Jim McPherson. I live in District 4 and work in Districts 7 and 8. In the minute I have, I'd like to say 3 things. First, thank you for your support of the recommended $5 million for historic preservation programs. Second, as an advocate for the State Parks Heritage Fund, I love parks. I want fun and accessible parks for residents in all council districts. So thank you for adding funds back in for Hans Park. But I'd like to remind everyone of the availability of heritage funds for parks. For the past 2 years, wearing my statewide hat, it's been great to see Buckeye, Bullhead City, Clarkdale, Flagstaff, Tucson, Quartzsite, Wilcox, and other communities apply and receive significant Heritage Fund support for their parks. Wearing my Phoenix hat, I'm surprised that no applications have been submitted for any Phoenix park in need. As for Mitch's non-sexy list of building needs, there's another state parks funding source we call the Heritage ARPA Fund for projects just like that. I would be happy to supply more information to anyone. Lastly,
Our next speaker is Amy Esposito, followed by Corey Kincaid. Amy, are you on the line? Amy is not on the line. Our next speaker is Corey Kincaid, followed by Vania Guevara. Corey, are you on the line?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, you may proceed.
Thank you. Madam Chair, members of the Executive Committee, first, thank you for your work on this effort. I realize that there's a lot of hard decisions here to be made. My focus in this conversation is very specific as it relates to the Vision Zero and transportation equity projects and their associated funding. I believe that the challenge with what's currently on the table around prioritization around these projects is contrary to much of both the public input process and the prioritization process that's been done at the subcommittee level. And that unfortunately exposes this entire process to a lot of criticism and a lot of concern around how those recommendations could be finalized in that state or manner. So my ask or request is this, that as the effort begins to rebalance and finalize recommendations before they proceed, look to shift funding again back into Vision Zero and equity mobility projects from items either like flood control or street maintenance, and at minimum ensure the prioritization that goes up the chain is reflective of the priority work that was done at the subcommittee level and consistent with public input. Thank you much.
Our next speaker is Vania Guevara, followed by Parker Pitt in Upper Council Chambers. Vania, are you on?
Good morning. Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes, please proceed.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yakutap, buen dia, good morning, committee members. I am calling in support of Vision Zero and equity-based transportation policy, just as a matter of a public safety issue and equity issue. When we're looking at what safety really means, I ask that you all consider access to parks, being able to freely move in our sidewalks and bike lanes for all people who are have disabilities and who are also able-bodied, to really be an inclusive and welcoming city that I know we all pride ourselves to live in. It's important from an environmental and racial justice perspective that the community's prioritization efforts from this committee be honored. And again, I just want to echo the importance of what safety really means to my community, and that means being able to freely walk in these streets, being able to access our parks, being able to not fear the roadways. And so I just ask that you honor that subcommittee and fully fund Vision Zero efforts. Thank you for your time.
Our next speaker in Upper Council Chambers is Parker Pitt, followed by Jessica Leach.
Good morning, council members. My name is Parker Pitt. I'm speaking today on behalf of the proposal to fully fund a permanent home for Value Theater. Value Theater has made a lasting impact on the lives of countless children. They have coached and mentored successful entertainers, community leaders, industry pioneers, and teaching artists. Their love for Value Theater brings them back to pass on their passion to a new generation of students. I am one of those students. I once was a shy kid, unable to look people in the eye. Spending recess alone in the library was routine, and speaking at city council meetings would have sounded as bad as eating a whole bucket of Brussels sprouts. I started attending classes at Value Theater when I was 6. Over the past 5 years, I've learned the value of hard work, respect, and how to achieve amazing things as a team. Most of all, they have taught me that I have a unique voice that the world deserves to hear. My mom and dad say that Value Theater turned my light on. I see myself as a leader. A New York town agent recently signed me, and I've learned to love Brussels sprouts. Value Theater is changing our community for the better. Each student comes with their own dreams, and VYT is dedicated to helping them achieve them all. So, please help Value Theater by fully funding their permanent home, so future generations of kids like me can find their voice. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Jessica Leach, followed by Mark Meets.
This is a regular Monday morning tradition. I don't know what I'm going to do on Mondays after this. My name is Jessica Leach. I am the Executive Director for the Southwest Center, and we are housed at the Parsons Center. I know the Parsons Center has been cut, and I know you're about to look at everything and do a reallocation. I am going to ask for at least partial funding for our expansion to move forward to continue providing healthcare and mental health services for people experiencing homelessness and for people of low income and other individuals who have historically had huge barriers to care. I do want to remind everyone, we are the only LGBTQ center on this proposal. We're the only healthcare center on this proposal. And to Committee Member Price's point, we're one of the only projects housed in downtown. We are in a central corridor, we have needed services, and again, I ask for at least partial funding. And I have 15 seconds left if anyone has any questions. Awesome. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Mark Meets, followed by Cindy Gahn.
Good morning. My name is Mark Metis. I'm president and CEO at the Herberger Theater Center. And by cutting critical and deferred maintenance projects from the arts and culture allocation, it may be an easy way to get down to a number, but it doesn't really solve the problem. Reallocating the CIP budgets or the arts and culture department budget means that something else that will come due that is equally important. For example, if the convention center has to fund the sound system because it's obsolete, that means pushing off something like repairs of the dimming system, which is equally obsolete and will equally shut us down. I also want to mention that although the Herberger is located in downtown, people who attend ticketed or free events come from all over the valley, all over the city, as evidenced by the zip codes represented on our list. The time is now to replace these critical items, so I urge you to restore the items funding for the items 7 through 9. Thank you for your time.
Our next speaker is Cindy Gahn, followed by Lawrence Bell.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Executive Committee. Cindy Gahn, Senior Director. I speak on behalf of Phoenix Community Alliance and its Board of Directors, all of our members as well. And for that, I ask for GO bond maximum funding for full funding of all 9 arts and culture projects. They are vital to our city, our entire city, as Subcommittee Chair Price stated. The ASU Health Technology Facility, which will serve as a strong economic driver. Vision Zero and equity-based implementation of T2050, advancing safety, equity, and accessibility. All historic preservation projects, because we cannot build new historic assets. In addition, I'd like to thank you for finding some funding for Hance Park. This is a regional park. Please don't forget that. And for the HHH Subcommittee, renovation, acquisition of property for non-congregate shelter, bridge housing, and innovations in housing, and also funding for the Parsons Center because of the reasons you've previously heard. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Lawrence Bell, followed by Lon Babby.
All right, thank you. My name is Lawrence Bell. I'm Executive Director, Arizona Jewish Historical Society, speaking on behalf of the Phoenix Holocaust Education Center project. I do want to point out, based on the discussion that you all just had, that our project is an $18 million project, of which we're only asking for 2. The other 16 of it are privately funded, and should the project be delayed, then we would lose the $16 million, which is why we need to be included. I also want to speak to why Phoenix needs a Holocaust Education Center. There was a recent study in 2019, 1/5 of millennials don't even know what the Holocaust is. They can't even identify it. And this is at a time when we are having a rise in racism and hatred and anti-Semitism and xenophobia, when our political discourse is becoming increasingly paralyzed. We must build this center now. I would also like to just point out briefly that the Holocaust was not just about Jews. The killing machinery was actually tested first on the disabled and mentally ill. That's where they perfected the killing process before they killed us. So with all of that, also I would point out LGBTQ people were also persecuted in the Holocaust. A lot of people were. So I hope you'll continue to consider that. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Lon Babby, followed by Michelle Dodds.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I am Lon Babby, co-chair of the Board of Directors of the Phoenix Symphony, along with my colleague Kevin Moriarty. I strongly urge you to allocate bond funds to make important and much-needed improvements to Symphony Hall, where we are principal tenants. I express this support on behalf of the patrons of the Symphony, as well as our staff, our musicians, our music director, and our board, all of whom work tirelessly to bring beautiful music to the community. Music which touches the hearts and souls of so many of us. As others have described, Symphony Hall has significant acoustical and audio deficiencies. Our music director, guest artists, and patrons routinely express frustration with the poor acoustics that prevent audiences from hearing and fully appreciating the musicality of our extraordinary musicians. In addition, there is a shortage of assisted listening devices for patrons with hearing loss. Quite simply, these bond funds are urgently needed to ensure that Symphony Hall is functioning as an up-to-date performing arts center that provides a first-class experience worthy of the fifth largest city in our country. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Michelle Dodds, followed by Matthew Schaefer.
Michelle Dawes, I just want to thank the committee for your hard work and your previous support for historic preservation, and hopefully that continued support as you make your final decision. The funds will benefit and help maintain city-owned historic properties, as well as support and invest in historic properties throughout the city. And if you haven't read Preservation Phoenix Style, it tells about all the benefits. It was just last year approved, tells all the benefits that these buildings bring to our city. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Matthew Schaefer, followed by Kate Wells.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you so much for your support of the arts and culture projects, especially the Phoenix Theater project. We appreciate all of your hard work. I would also join the rest of my colleagues here today to urge you to consider funding the other 3 projects that were cut out of the Arts and Culture Subcommittee. The state of the arts and culture buildings in the city is rapidly deteriorating, and that funding is urgently needed. So I urge you to reconsider. Thank you so much.
Our next speaker is Kate Wells, followed by Hope Ozer.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thank you again for your thoughtful consideration of all of the subcommittee's projects and budgets. It could not have been easy. As CEO of the Children's Museum, I want to again encourage the Executive Committee to fully fund completing the renovation of our 110-year-old building that was started back in 2001. The project will be incredibly impactful to residents from every single council district in the city. It will spur additional philanthropic investment and will be completed within the 5-year bond cycle. Additionally, I really hope that you will reconsider including the major maintenance budget into this bond, because it impacts every single arts organization that is owned in a city building. HVAC and electrical panels are definitely not exciting or sexy, but none of our organizations can survive without any of them. Thank you for your time.
Our next speaker is Hope Ozer, followed by Philip Wyatt.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Executive Committee. I'm Hope Ozer, and 33 years ago, I founded the Board of Valley Youth Theater. I'd like to share with you snippets from just 2 letters highlighting VYT's impact on the community. This one from a parent. You took a child that no one believed in and gave him a chance. It's something that no one has ever done for him. You saw beyond the child that gets hyper when he's nervous and trying to fit in, and made him part of the family. You stuck by him at those times when it would have been easier to walk away. Instead, you showed him direction and gave him reason to feel pride. She goes on to say, I appreciate that the fact that we don't have a lot of money doesn't set us apart from the rest, that everyone is accepted and welcomed. And this one from a Roosevelt School District student after attending VYT's Literacy in the Arts outreach program. I'm in 2nd grade and I'm 8. We went on the field trip to Rumpelstiltskin on Thursday. I liked the part when Laura got married to the prince. I enjoyed the book and I read it to my little brother Sergio. An 8-year-old from a non-English speaking household is reading in English to her little brother. And there are thousands more. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Our next speaker is Philip Wyatt, followed by Bob Cooper.
Before my time starts, we have several people that have registered to speak from the Phoenix Center for the Arts. In the interest of adhering to your rules, I will be speaking on all of their behalf. So you guys can stand. Ready to begin? Thank you for your time and consideration. Equity has become synonymous with leveling the playing field. Equality has become synonymous with leveling the playing field. So let's make the word equity synonymous with more for those who need it. Arts and culture needs equity. We need more funding to do the work that has been. Do we have equity with other cities that are much smaller than us? So we need the additional funding. So advocating for all of the organizations that are asking for funding in arts and culture is the first part. The second part is to help you to understand who Phoenix Center for the Arts is. I am the CEO, Sandra Bassett, and we serve people from many different factions of arts and culture. That includes theater, that includes music, that includes dance, that includes visual arts. It includes a wide plethora of engagement throughout the city. Additionally, we do also provide free opportunities and we reduce barriers to entry into arts and culture. That's why it is critical for us to receive the funding we need to be able to continue doing the work that no one else in the community offers at this time. It is dangerous for us to have to climb up 14-foot ladders just to change a gel. And when our equipment cannot be replaced, which we are at that critical stage right now, we will not be able to function and serve the over 50 organizations that do not have a home or an opportunity to participate in arts and culture. Again, we ask for equity. We thank you for our consideration of everyone that has applied through arts and culture, and we ask again that they all be included and considered, and we thank you for the Phoenix Center for the Arts.
Just for clarification, Philip Wyatt, were you one of the ones standing, and Bob Cooper? Okay, our next speaker is Bob Cooper.
Per the Madam Chair's request, I defer to Hope Ozer and the lovely Parker Pitt for speaking on behalf of Value Theater. Just want to say thank you for your time and your energy and all you put into this. Thank you.
Our next speaker, Cameron Norwood Peterson. Okay. And our next speaker is Cadell Grissinger. Has yielded. Our next speaker is Leanne Dolan.
I yield my time.
Okay. Our next speaker is Tim Sprague, followed by Samuel Gomez.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee. First of all, I thank you for your time and what you've done here. And next, I want to thank you as the past president of the Hants Park Conservancy for your motion earlier today to find $3 million to help us. In 2010, the Hants Park Conservancy was formed. I was one of the neighbors that were involved in doing that process. We're working to have Hants Park become what it should be, a great park for a great city. Hants Park is unique in the fact that it really is a city park and not just a neighborhood element. People from all over the valley go to Hants Park, as evidenced by all the different activities that happen there. And secondly, Hants Park's unique because there really is a very active public-private fundraising program. And lastly, Hants Park is a park that the operating budget won't be exceeded from where we are today. It's really important as we go out to seek private money to come in and support the renovation of Hants Park that the city supports along with the private money. I thank you for that $3 million allocation today and ask that if there are new funds that come about, please consider Hants Park. Thank you.
Our last speaker in upper council chambers is Samuel Gomez.
Buenos dias. Thank you, Madam Chair and staff. My name is Sam Gomez. I'm the executive director to the Sagrado Galleria. I'm a proud and born and raised Phoenician. I'm here to advocate for all the arts and culture projects to get passed through. Arts and culture is very important, not only for our community, but for our city. As a growing city and being the 5th largest city and Super Bowl coming and our spotlight, and I think it's important that arts and culture is on the forefront. I think we need to look at that more as a workforce. We're an actual workforce here in the city, and many times we're the first ones on the scene when it comes to developing a community that allows developers to give it value so they can come and create their business. I'm also here to emphasize the Latino Cultural Center. As you know, I think it's been decades that we've been trying to get this to pass through. It's a little embarrassing that our city could not get it right and get this to pass through. And I think it's also imperative, but it's also a value not only for the Latino community, but for all the cultures here, which it would be a cultural bridge making for other projects to come in the future. So really would hope that this gets passed through and that we're not waiting another 5 years for this to come into fruition. So thank you.
Our next speaker in upper council chambers is Katina Caller, followed by Mary Moriarty.
Good morning. No offense taken. My name is Katrina Kaler. I am the president and CEO of ArtLink. I'm also the chair of Phoenix Community Alliance's Arts, Culture, and Public Life Committee. I also serve on the Hans Park Conservancy as the Marketing Communications Chair, and I really want to thank everyone here who's involved in the creative thinking behind the $3 million allocation to Hans Park, this regional park that serves all. On behalf of the arts and culture, I really strongly encourage this committee, Madam Chair, I forgot to acknowledge you and your fellow chairs. Good morning. I really encourage this committee to think as creatively, if not more so, for the creative sector. This is a sector, if invested in, returns beyond that investment, beyond its years of investment. You're also looking at projects that have waited for quite some time for this investment. These are critical repairs, these are critical structures, these are critical programs that benefit not just the organizations asking for the funds, but the population as a whole, as a community as a whole, and as a city as a whole. We can find the extra funds for the additional projects. I strongly encourage support for all 9 projects. You can do it. I believe in this body. You've provided great service, and I know it can be done. Thank you so much for your service to date. Thank you for city staff for all of your putting the calculating work that you're doing. Hopefully, as we speak, and arts and culture can walk away with a win, and we promise it will reflect well on this body and this city for years to come. Thank you.
Our next speaker in upper council chambers is Mary Moriarty.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members, for allowing me to speak. I'm speaking on behalf of the Hans Park Conservancy. Margaret Hans Park and I go back about 25 years. 25 years ago, downtown wasn't what it is today. And it is really important that downtown has blossomed, that Margaret Hans Park blossom with it. Margaret Hans Park hosts 3 major ethnic cultural centers: the Jewish Historical Society, the Irish Cultural Center, and the Japanese Friendship Garden. These are not only just for the city, the valley, or the state. We get people from around the world to all of them. It would be wonderful for them to see a wonderful park that Phase 1 would allow them to see. We also get festivals on the east side of the Hans Park, which also get people from around the state, the country, and the world. Please try to find the money. Margaret Hans Park got left out when it was first built because there was no money. Please don't let that happen again. Thank you for your time.
Okay, we have 2 virtual speakers that have returned online. We have Amy Esposito, followed by Lisa Perez. Amy, are you on the line?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, please proceed.
Okay, great. So I am here today to advocate for funding Vision Zero and affordable transportation. I believe that as a citizen and someone that works in our community, that we need to create accessible and affordable options for folks that have disabilities, that have that are lower income and cannot afford car insurance, owning a car, all those sorts of things. And so what I'd really like to see is a more additional funds allocated to address equitable access to transportation, because as our climate gets warmer and with the urban heat island, we need to make sure people are safe and have the basic right to be able to move and go to their jobs and see their families in a safe way. So I am advocating for more funding towards Vision Zero and affordable transportation.
Our next speaker is Lisa Perez. Lisa, are you on the line?
I am. Can you hear me this time?
Yes, please proceed.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you again for all the hard work that you've put in for this bond committee. I know it's been a really tough decision because I can't think of any of the programs that are on this list that are not important. But I'm here today to continue to support and to advocate for the Estrella Civic Space and Estrella Branch Library. I know that you did put them up higher on the list, and I do appreciate that. I can't stress enough how we do not have the quality of life items at a lot of places that we probably take for granted in the Central City area, and this will be crucial to the growth and the future of this area. Thank you again for your consideration, and please continue to keep this as your top priority. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I believe that was our last speaker.
Thank you very much. This then officially does conclude our public comment period, and I want to thank everyone who participated. We will now move on to looking at each of our subcommittees. I'm going to ask staff to recap our prior work subcommittee by subcommittee. We will pause on each of the subcommittees and finalize the subcommittee's list or consider any proposed adjustments. And again, if there's a conflict of interest, we will deal with it like we have in the past. Several of the subcommittees are a bit below budget, below the target. So one consideration I would ask that you consider as we proceed that any residual amounts remain with each subcommittee program area to be used as a contingency fund to provide additional funding as necessary to complete projects. But we'll put this open for full discussion. So with that, I would like to ask staff to display each subcommittee list of projects on the screen for final committee consideration and for action. We're going to go alphabetical, so we are going to start with arts and culture.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, so you should be able to see on the screen a summary of each subcommittee program area, where the current dollar amount currently is, and that amount that could potentially be used, as you mentioned, as a contingency. With the exception of arts, you do see that we have an overage of $238,000. So what we are planned to do is to have Chris Fazio, Deputy Budget Director, will go over each subcommittee's program area, restate the priority list of projects, associated dollar amounts, and then staff would be looking for discussion and a motion by subcommittee program area.
Before you start, I'd like to open this up and ask our Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Chair and city staff and my fellow committee members. Before we do this, I just want to ask one more time. With going through this the last several weeks, knowing even this morning that we heard that there were federal funding or other funding sources available, with everybody here today, is there any other person that can come forward and share if there's any other federal funding for any of the subcommittees that we have not heard today that could help offset costs? I just want to give that one more opportunity.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
members of the subcommittee, from my perspective, I think we've exhausted all of our list of additional funding, internal as well as those that we know about currently that we have in hand.
Thank you.
Chairman Torres.
Question about process. When we're going through these, are we going to revisit the prioritization of some of these subcommittees, especially some of the ones that came first? Is that allowed in this part of the?
That's certainly on the table for the chairman to discuss.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, just one real quick thing.
Chairman Neymark.
When we first started and the city manager laid out the target for us, one thought I expressed at the time was we should hit that target. And then if there are other priority projects that we think the city council ought to consider, should there be should the overall pot grow, that we consider putting those things in sort of a reserve place and say, we couldn't find funds for these within the 500 target, but if you, the city council, are looking, if you continue to analyze what things look like for the future and you have another 20 million or whatever it is that could be added to that number, here's what we, the executive committee, think ought to be high on the list for your consideration. So I'd like to just suggest that again today as a way to perhaps solve for the things that we know right now are not funded, but many of us might feel ought to be funded. And the only concern I have is if we make votes section by section, I want to at the end perhaps reserve the ability to do that, so that you don't have to solve it necessarily within each section, but at the end we could maybe have a motion that would include 3 or 4 items or whatever it is that we think, hey, Mayor and Council, these are really high priorities. We heard a lot from the public about them, and if you identify any additional money, these would be our recommended highest priorities, understanding that the Mayor and Council get to do whatever they want with that.
I would like to ask the city manager and city staff to comment on that, and I do have a comment as well.
Madam Chair, Member Neymark, staff's plan right now, once the executive committee makes their decisions by subcommittee program area, the chair will be drafting a letter to send to the city council. Staff will be preparing reports that will include the ranked priority order of projects and associated dollar amounts. If it is at the will of the committee that we advance to the council those projects by subcommittee program area that fell below the line, just so they're aware, we certainly can include that information in the report that will go to the city council on December 13th.
Thank you for that clarification. I think the recommendation is a good one. I think our goal here today is to complete our work within the framework that we've been given, the $500 million, and want every committee to have the opportunity now to see if they want to move things around, make any changes. But I agree with the recommendation. I'm hoping it's not going to be 10 or 20 items, but very targeted items. We've heard from so many people in the public. We've heard from city staff who have found significant additional dollars. So we've already enhanced the impact of this body by virtue of forcing some of those issues, but we haven't done it with all of the committees. And so I think it provides an opportunity. Let me see if other members of the committee want to weigh in on this approach. Chairman Wilcox.
I think possible is important. I didn't quite understand on the monies that are, on the available funds. Those funds, were not prioritized because probably projects cost too much. So are those funds available for some of the projects that Rick mentioned? I would hope they would be, and we wouldn't automatically close it off to have a full discussion at the end on that $1,027,680 that we could possibly fund if we're in agreement on some priority funds, budgets.
Could I ask staff their thought on that?
Yes, Madam Chair, Member Wilcox, that's correct. So it's up to the committee how you would like to take that remaining $1 million that you see on the screen, and you could allocate that to one particular project if the committee decides to do that. You could keep it as a contingency in each program area as it was recommended by the chair. You could distribute it really however you would like. That's at the will of the committee.
Okay, thank you.
Other comments? Let me turn it back then to staff, and let's review arts and culture.
Madam Chair, based on its prior actions, the Executive Committee identified the following projects to recommend to City Council from the Arts and Culture Subcommittee in the following order: Latino Cultural Center, Valley Youth Theater, Children's Museum of Phoenix expansion, Phoenix Center for the Arts Improvements, Phoenix Theater Company ADA accessibility, and Arizona Jewish Historical Society renovation and expansion. The project's total, $50,238,000. This amount is $238,000 above the Executive Committee's approved target of $50 million.
Any other thoughts or recommendations?
Madam Chair. With the question for staff, is the Symphony Hall theatrical venue improvements, is that something that is scalable? It looks like it's a $5 million budget right now, but would any amount of funds be able to be used? It seems like Symphony Hall is a main economic driver for our city and for the arts and culture space, and would make sense to make sure that we upkeep that to the highest extent possible.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Member Torres, we've looked at the total Symphony Hall project that includes the acoustical fixes to address the deficiencies in the sound quality of the hall. It includes audiovisual improvements that enhance the experience for the patron, and then it includes replacing the assistive listening devices. So in the overall scheme of that project, the only components of that are potentially scalable would be the AV pieces of that. Again, that amounts to about $820,000 of the entire project.
Other thoughts or comments from city staff? You can see that we're struggling to see where we can find some other opportunity, and we could, if we can't find it here, then I think we'll come back at the end of this and prioritize, as Chairman Neymark suggested, top categories that we want to be recommending to the City Council.
So, Madam Chair, I recommend that we keep the Symphony Hall project on that list of projects to reconsider once we get back through all of the projects to see if there's any funding left to allocate a portion of it.
Let's note that with our listing.
Madam Chair, just one comment on this list. This is the only one that looks like it's over, I think, right, from that prior chart. I know the chairman has been very vocal that she believes this category ought to stay whole or be fully funded. So my suggestion is we don't try to address the 238 by cutting it out of something, and instead just leave this list as is, knowing that our total is, we have $1 million to mess around with, I guess, is in theory, within the city manager's target. I'm not suggesting that as a motion at this point, but I'm just thinking, fine, this is a good list, and we should consider those other three projects in our final deliberations.
Other comments?
Just for clarification, we would then, for each of the divisions that we're going to look at, we would make a comment on what we would want on that priority list and then come back at the end and either fund some of them or send them to council as a priority.
I think that's correct. I think we want a final recommendation that is in the lines of the 500 million, and then our strong priority and recommendation for some additional funding.
Madam Chair, if I may, kind of piggybacking off of what you and Chair and Committee Member Wilcox and Committee Member Neymark were just saying, you really have 2 points of view right now, right? And 2 choices before you. If your attempt is to stay within the $50 million that is allocated and adopted for this particular area, you could either A, take that $238,000 and allocate that reduction across the board to certain projects, and I would defer to Mitch Menchaca on what that would look like. Or you could, again, to the other point, is you do have $1 million that is overstated in other areas. However, that would take away some contingency funding in those other areas as well. But that is within your scope. But if the intent is to get back in line with the target and have this be the kind of final deliberations, then those are the choices you have to make right now.
I appreciate that advice, and I really think each of the committees needs to come in at their number. It just doesn't seem fair to have an overreach here, even though it's small, because other committees had those overages, and we talked it through and got those to the recommended number. So that would be my recommendation. So one thing to consider would be to spread that across the top 6 items and get that to the budget, and then come back with our priorities. Chairman, please.
Madam Chair, may I add possibly a third option? Knowing that some of these projects, again, are ADA compliance, they're in historic buildings, managed by Parks and Rec Department, could that $238,148 possibly, I hate to use the term earmarked, but within neighborhood services, could $238,148 of the 5 or 10 million towards ADA compliance, could that go towards our Phoenix Theater project in order to get us to our 50 million?
I know we've discussed that in the past, but I'd like to turn this back to staff.
Mayor, members of the council, if I'm understanding council of the executive committee, you can see I spend too much time at this table. If I'm understanding the question correctly, we have $10 million currently under Neighborhood and City Services Subcommittee recommendations for city ADA facility projects. If I'm understanding, the question is, can $200,238 of that be reduced from that committee to offset this overage here, which would be, in line with the $50 million. That's a question that would be to you. I mean, that is one way to go at it, but that would require you to reduce the neighborhood subcommittee by $238,000.
Madam Chair, if I could also add, as you can see back on the screen, we've pulled up the summary. So based off of Member Press's suggestion, what you could consider is that $385,000 that's over for neighborhoods and city services, you could use a portion of that amount to then cover the $238,000 deficit, if you will, for arts and culture.
And that was just one example. I mean, I don't mean to pick on one project over another, but just, again, knowing that we have projects that could have landed at other subcommittees, is there an opportunity to get a small commitment to at least get us back to that 50 million and not reduce projects further?
If you do it the way that Amber suggests, you're not taking anything away from the projects that you've agreed to fund in the neighborhoods. So you're just taking part of that overage, which our recommendation was just to have a contingency. But I mean, a $300,000 contingency on, $60 million or $40 million doesn't really do much for you, to be honest with you.
Madam Chairman?
Would you comment on?
No, it's Ms. Shazi.
Excuse me.
It's
yes.
Abraham.
I was going to ask Chairman James, who chairs that subcommittee, if that would be something that overage could be used for to get all of our committees within line to the 500 million.
Yes, I would be in agreement of that. Though I was kind of hoping that we could use some of it in some way with historic preservation moving forward. I think that would be very helpful because it is very much a part of neighborhood and city services. Yes, I will be very willing to participate in it, but again, I'm also looking at historic preservation. I think it's very, very important for us.
Maybe it's semantics, but let me maybe phrase it a different way. Knowing that there's, I think, 10 million in ADA accessible, ADA improvements within this subcommittee could, again, it's semantics, but I guess rather than state that we're reducing it, just commit $238,000 of it towards the Phoenix Theater, their accessibility project. And I don't know if that's possible or not. Maybe that's why we have to do a reduction, but just kind of earmarking that $238,000 that's needed.
Madam Chair, if I may, you can do that. The only thing that I would say is that, again, that $10 million was ADA projects across the entirety of the city for everything that we own. The project that you're speaking to specifically, Debney, that was one project that had a total dollar amount. So it would be cleaner if we just kept them within one initiative, because now you're going to be crossing multiple initiatives within the ballot language, and that becomes very complicated to kind of keep straight.
And again, not meaning to pick on one committee over another. There are overages or there's surplus in other areas too.
Chairman Wilcox and then Chairman.
Just a comment. I really think if we're going to leave this money for the 1027, we should go through everything, leave it, and then discuss what are the priorities. Because if we start choosing right now, I would put forth the Parkinson Center, and I don't think it'd be fair until we have the bottom amount that we want to spend, and then we can decide as a group where we want that to go instead of just choosing one right now.
Madam Chair.
Madam Chair.
I wanted to just agree with that. I've been patiently waiting to get to our subcommittee to make some of those recommendations as well. So if we could continue on,
sure.
I'd appreciate that.
Madam Chair, if you don't mind, could I make a recommendation based off this discussion? Another option could be for staff to recommend a way to resolve the $238,000 deficit within arts, potentially by doing a weighted allocation, for example, based off the priority order to reduce projects to achieve the target. That is another option.
Madam Chair, just a comment that was made in the public comment part of our meeting was the issue of the Heritage Fund. And I know that we've had record lotteries, right? I believe that money comes from the lottery. Do we know if there's any additional funding available for local communities from that fund? It gets dumped into, right? I don't know. It may just be state. It may just be state, and I may be speaking from ignorance here, but is there any that comes down to the local communities?
We would have to do some research on that, David, but unfortunately right now I can't answer that question. I don't know the answer to it, to be honest with you.
Let me come back to you, Mr. Neymark.
Out of respect for what a couple of the chairs have just said, I'll withdraw my comment. I was going to make a motion to do what Chairman James had agreed with, but I'll wait till the end.
Madam Chair, I just want to be careful that we're not in some way changing what the city manager's recommendation was. Seems like we're trying to tiptoe around this $1,027,000 surplus, and we're now calling it a reserve, but that wasn't part of the city manager's original recommendation. So when we all work to fit into those recommendations, that was available funds. So it seems kind of logical. If we have an overage in some areas and a deficit in others, why wouldn't we just use these funds to meet that versus now setting this $1 million aside as if our target was $1 million less than it actually is?
I think this has been great conversation. Any other comments?
Just one comment. The idea was not to set it aside. It's to set it so that at the end of this meeting, we will allocate it. And everything that the city manager wants us to allocate would be allocated. So,
Madam Chair, could I ask a clarifying question, please?
That's committee member Grandal. She's on virtually.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, I'm not just a voice in the room. I do have a question because there's been such great discussion with all of this. And just to clarify through this discussion, are we looking at each committee as we just did over the last several weeks to see what could be changed or what couldn't be changed, prioritizing in terms of what committee member Naymark had mentioned at the end, and then we'll vote at the very end? Or are we actually going to have motions for each committee again, starting with arts? It isn't clear to me. I apologize.
Madam Chair, committee member Grandal, that's correct. What staff's recommendation was so that it's very clear to the public and for staff and for the council, was to have motions and action by subcommittee program area. So that was the intention. Certainly, if it's at the will of the committee, you could wait to get through each subcommittee program area and then make a decision how you would like to allocate the $1 million difference. It's really at the will of the committee, but what we would be trying to do is make it very clear by subcommittee program area what your decisions are. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. I'd recommend we
try. Thank you.
I recommend that we would try to call for a vote with each subcommittee within the parameters of what the budget is, and then let's add that list below that to come back to talk about it.
So, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, it would seem that the hang-up is that the arts and culture budget is over by almost $240,000, and unless added funds could be added to arts and culture, I think that out of equity, as we have heard, I think a weighted subtraction from all projects would have to be put in place. The Latino Cultural Center, though, has been, as mentioned, 20 years in the making. It's had 20 years of public comment. Valley Youth Theater has had 14 years of public comment, but I don't see another way of making a decision to cut a project, but to cut from all projects.
Madam Chair, just a process question again, too. Is our vote on each of these redundant? Haven't we already voted on these recommendations per our previous motions that we made?
Well, we have we definitely have done that, but we have the ability to move around within each committee. So, in other words, one of the discussions here is, could we look at the Arts and Culture Committee and pick this up through some pro rata reduction and still get to that same bottom line? But our goal is to get to that number, and then we have talked about the idea of adding a list of other priorities as well. So I think that's what we would like to do here, with arts and culture being number one, that ability to pro rata reduction within the committee recommendations, or approve it within the allotted amount with language that we would come back to afterwards as one of the priorities that we would discuss additional funding if we have it.
Madam Chair, if I may, just to clarify a little bit more to Committee Member Martin's point or question, I think what you adopted previously were actions with flexibility. So I think at some point the flexibility portion has to be taken away and you have to solidify a final motion.
Madam Chair, I'm ready to make a motion for the Executive Committee for Arts and Culture. The Executive Committee recommends to the City Council an Arts and Culture Go Bond program of $50 million with products rank order 1 through 6 and project values as shown on the screen in Arts and Culture Geo Bond program contingency funding, with the understanding at the end of all of this, we'll look at the $238,148. Did I make that motion clear? Thank you.
Second.
Madam Chair, if I can just clarify, because with the arts and culture program, you have a deficit of $238,000. So if the motion means that you would be approving the arts and culture program to be over 238,000 at the end to resolve that?
Not over at 50 million, but with the contingency of either taking it off the entire 1 through 6 projects to equal the 238,148, but not going above 50 million.
Thank you.
Second.
Other comments? Then I'm going to call for the vote. Those in favor, please let it be known by saying aye.
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 Opposed?
Madam Chair, same abstention related to Valley Youth Theater.
And Madam Chair, just
Yes.
what you're seeing on your screen now shows the prorated reductions to each project, which were based on the project's value. And so you're now seeing the committee at $50 million.
Madam Chairman.
Yes.
So this basically is what we voted on then, just to reduce those projects, and this is the figures in. Okay. Right.
Correct.
Thank you very much. Let's go to the next committee, Economic Development and Education.
Madam Chair, committee members, based on its prior actions with flexibility, the committee identified the following projects to recommend to the City Council from the Economic Development and Education Subcommittee in the following order: Rio Reimagined Land Acquisition, ASU Health Technology Center, and Spark Area Land Acquisition. The project amounts for ASU Health Technology Center and Spark Area, project amount for ASU Health Technology Center was reduced from $15 million to $12 million. The projects total $38 million and equal the Executive Committee's approved target.
Chairman?
Well, I second that. Ours is pretty straightforward, so I did.
Other comments or discussion? Those in favor, please let it be known by saying aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
I abstain from the ASU piece.
Next is the Environment and Sustainability Subcommittee.
Madam Chair, the Executive Committee has recommended the following projects based on its initial actions with flexibility: energy and water efficiency and renewable energy upgrades at city facilities, heat resiliency, city brownfields redevelopment projects, and city facility vehicle electrification stations. The recommended amount for the subcommittee of $26 million equals the Executive Committee's approved target of $26 million.
Questions or comments, recommendations?
I recommend that the Executive Committee consider an increase in the allocation of funds to numbers 1 and 2, energy and water efficiency and heat resiliency, to match the amounts that were recommended by the subcommittee, and that would be in the amount of $20 million for energy and water efficiency and renewable energy projects and $11 million for heat resilience projects. So I just request that those be added to the priority list. The subcommittee originally requested an additional $15 million of funding, but I think those are the two most critical areas in this list so far. And I want to remind everybody here today that without a healthy environment and livable community for everyone, none of the projects on this bond will matter.
Well, I would like to ask if you could make a motion within the parameters, and then we'll come back to the priority list.
What motion do you want me to make? Oh, sorry.
Can you make a motion
It'd be one
that would be consistent with the approved list within the targeted areas? And then the additional funding would be something we'll talk about after we get through all of this.
Okay. I make the motion. I'm just not sure what motion I'm making.
Madam Chair, maybe I can help to clarify. So right now, as you can see on the screen, what was approved for the Environment and Sustainability Program area would be a target of $26 million for projects 1 through 4, with the amounts identified under the current amount column. So that is what staff would be looking for as a motion and an action. I believe what you would like to consider is, once the committee makes that motion and action, that the original funding amounts for projects 1 and 2, as recommended by the subcommittee, be considered by the council for either a future bond program or if additional funding were to be available to those full amounts.
Correct. I was just confused as to why I needed to make a motion if we're not changing the numbers from the previous action on this item. But yes, I make the motion in what
Second.
what was mentioned.
Any other comments or questions? Those in favor, please let it be known by saying aye.
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 Opposed? So moved. Thank you. Next, we're going to go to Housing, Human Services, and Homelessness.
Madam Chair, committee members, based on its prior actions with flexibility, the committee identified the following projects to recommend to City Council from the Housing, Human Services, and Homelessness Subcommittee in the following order: Affordable Housing Property Preservation Phase 1, Cesar Chavez Senior Center, McDowell Senior Center renovation, Choice Neighborhoods Housing Development Gap Financing, and Innovation in Affordable Housing Program. This amount totals $299,700 below the Executive Committee's approved target of $63 million.
Comments?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you, and Executive Committee members. I am absolutely positive that the H&H Committee would not want to leave a dollar on the table. The original recommendation was $102 million. We reduced $22 million from critical shelter services and reduced another $10 million from gap financing for affordable housing. So I would like to make a recommendation to keep it, to add the $299,000 and prioritize that for the Parsons Center and any other additional funds that might be available, including the $1 million.
I would second that.
Comment from staff? I want to be sure we re-articulate so we are all understanding this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Staff is clear on the motion.
Madam Chair, just a question. I'm very supportive of finding funding for the Parsons Center. I guess I have a question either for the staff or the director. If that's the only amount of funding we came up with, is there actually a project that could be implemented?
I agree with that. I did hear Jessica Leach say that they would consider partial funding. We never saw what that partial funding might look like or what that amount of money might get, so I agree with you, Rick. I do agree with that. I just wanted to get the conversation started that there is a lot of support and interest of supporting the Parsons Center. It was really my recommendation to get that interest on the table and get started. But I agree. If $299 is not helpful, But anyway, city staff's at the table.
And Madam Chair, before I turn it over to Gina, I don't think we have a lot of detail behind the Parsons Center request. The other thing that I would caution us on is with $299,000, again, these are bond funds, and so we have to meet certain thresholds in terms of useful life and all of those types of things. I doubt very seriously that for $299,000 we get something that is going to stay within the confines and the IRS limitations of our bond proceeds.
Thank you. Our consultant, Mr. Butler.
Madam Chair, thank you. I find city manager's comments valid. I think we should do what we've done with the arts and culture and do a pro rata allocation to increase each of those other line items and then prioritize the Parsons Center for future funding as a recommendation to the City Council.
And I would, well, I'll hear from Gina.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Executive Committee. On that, I think that's an excellent alternative in terms of the Parsons project and the scalability and that amount. I can't really speak to that. We don't have a tremendous level of detail in terms of that project. So apologies that I can't really answer that particular question. We're kind of just learning as the committee, as staff, we're just learning as the committee is about the details of that project.
So the prior recommendation that I heard, that to include the 299 and the other projects that are already recommended, and that the Parsons Center be set as one of those priority projects I think that Rick was talking about for other city funding.
Second.
A second. Other comments? Those in favor, please let it be known.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry. I just want to make sure staff is clear on the motion. Can you restate the motion?
Yes, that the 299,000, whatever that full amount is, be reallocated amongst the other projects, and that the Parsons Center be included on that list, identified for city fund, other city funds as a priority project.
Thank you.
All clear? Those in favor, please let it be known by saying aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? So moved. Thank you. Let's go to neighborhoods and city services.
Madam Chair, committee members, based on its prior actions, the Executive Committee identified the following projects to recommend to City Council from the Neighborhoods and City Services Subcommittee in the following order: Branch Library at Estrella Civic Space, City Facility ADA improvements, Yucca Branch Library expansion, Branch Library at Desert View Civic Space, and historic preservation programs. This amount equals $385,339 below the Executive Committee's adopted target of $45 million.
Madam Chair, committee members, I support this, the rankings 1 through 5, and I think this is very much acceptable to us. So I would definitely recommend this.
Would that be a motion?
That would be my motion.
Could I have a second?
Second.
Other discussion?
Madam Chair, sorry if I can interject again. I just want to clarify, Member James, are you recommending that the surplus of $385,000 remain within your subcommittee program area?
Yes, I will recommend that. And as we move forward, if there are other opportunities where we can apply it to other things that would be helpful to other subcommittees, I would like to look into that as we move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Those in favor, please let it be known by saying aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Let's go to Parks and Recreation.
Madam Chair, the Executive Committee identified the following projects to recommend to the City Council from the Parks and Recreation Subcommittee in the following order: citywide funding for parks minor capital projects, Esteban Park Recreation Center reduced by $500,000 today, South Mountain roadway safety enhancements reduced by $3 million today, Harmon Park Regional Pool and 3 splash pad sites, Maryville Park Regional Pool and 2 splash pad sites, Estrella Civic Space reduced by $4 million today using other funding, Desert View Civic Space, Telephone Pioneers of America Park, Recreation Center improvements, Mountain View Community Center, Sports Complex improvements, and Margaret Hance Park improvements at $3 million. This amount equals $75,751 below the Executive Committee's approved target of $64 million.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman, I'm going to move this forward. I want to make one clarification for the public who's watching. Once again, that even though Esteban and Estrella were reduced, we did find other funding for it that brings it up to its total. I don't want people in the community to think that we took money off of that. And I would like to thank staff again for finding that money. And we were able to find money also for Margaret T. Hance in the terms of $3 million. So with that, I'll go ahead and ask that the 75,751 that's remaining be moved into the list for possible other funding.
Any clarification needed?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So what staff would ask of the committee is once we finish, that we circle back to those subcommittee program areas that have a surplus amount so we can be very clear for the public and get direction from the committee on what you would like to do with those funds.
Okay. Could I have a second to the motion?
Second.
Thank you. Other comments, questions? Those in favor, please let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So carried. Thank you. Public safety.
Staff just would like to clarify, my apologies, was there anyone who needed to abstain from that vote?
I suppose it was me. I apologize, I abstain for fundraising for Haynes Park.
Thank you. It's up on the screen. Thank you.
Madam Chair, based on its prior actions with flexibility, the Executive Committee identified the following projects to recommend to City Council from the Public Safety Subcommittee in the following order: Fire Station 7, Fire Station 13, Fire Station 15, Cactus Park Precinct relocation with the scope reduced to delay the Northern Command Center relocation, Fire Station 51, Police Property Management Warehouse renovation, and Maryville Police Precinct renovations. This amount totals $229,432 below the Executive Committee's approved target of $132,500,000.
So we're a bit over here.
Madam Chair, it's $229,432 below the target. So $229,000 surplus.
There it is. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. I appreciate all the information, and I'm going to apologize that Chairman Berline and I have not had a discussion about these final recommendations. So before I make any motions, I do have a couple of comments and questions, and I actually have some questions for Chief Walker. So I'm very, I've done some research, and I've had a lot of discussion, and I think Councilman Garcia had a really good point during the public safety meeting this last week. He asked how quickly we could get stations up and running, because clearly the need is great. So one of the things I'd like to discuss and bring forward is Station 20. From my research and from what I understand, and actually we were involved. I'm a board member of the North Central Phoenix Homeowners Association, so when the land purchase deals were going on, we were kept apprised of that. So here's a station that the land has been purchased, and it's my understanding, Chief Walker, that there are architectural plans available or have been discussed for that station. Is that so?
Madam Chair and Committee Member Ender, at this time you're correct that the land was purchased for the expansion of the current station number 20. At this time we do not have any plans that have been begun in drawing or any really definitive design for that site.
Okay, thank you. But I also understand just from discussion, when you look at that station, that they would be able to continue to operate out of that station even during expansion or construction. And I also understand that that station, in fact, is very supports Station 7, which has the highest call volume. Is that right?
Madam Chair and Committee Member Ender, yes, Station 20 certainly supports Station 7. There are contiguous borders, so when Station 7 is on a call, Station 20 units would respond into that area. Our hope and desire is to be able to have some type of temporary facility on site with at least one of the apparatus currently assigned to Station 20 during construction. Obviously, it's a sizable piece of property. We will be building a sizable station, so our hope is and plan is to have some type of temporary facility there.
Okay, great. So with that said, I think it's really important to put 20 really back into whether we I don't know if the surplus would cover that. Can you explain? I'm sorry, I don't have the number. I don't even have the numbers of what that cost would be. Oh, well, here they are. So, is that reasonable to put Station 20 back in there as a project that will be?
Madam Chair, Committee Member Ender, Station 20 has a need of $18.2 million in GO bond funding. And so what we're talking about here is now less than $1 million that's available. So there is no capacity to move Station 20 into the funding mix. On top of that, it also has another $5 million worth of ongoing operating costs that we are also concerned about.
Would you think, how do you feel about shifting one of the other stations? Do you see 20 as a greater priority?
Madam Chair and Committee Member Ender, certainly the fire department has a lot of needs as we represented to our subcommittee. Our subcommittee did see the top 8 recommendations and came up to this prioritization list. Truthfully, at this situation, where we're at as far as the need, we would be replacing one high need with another high need.
So you're comfortable then with the rank in the way that we're going to move forward with it?
Madam Chair and Committee Member Ender, based on what was moved forward by the subcommittee, these 4 stations will have a real impact on service delivery, both in response time and in the impact to the firefighters responding on the calls.
Then with that said, I will motion to move forward with the public safety program. I hope you understand. I just feel like public safety is our number one priority for the city, and I just want to make sure we're doing the right thing and putting the right priorities to it. So if you're comfortable with that, and I believe Chief Kurtenbach was comfortable with the PD program, so I will motion to move it forward to City Council for approval then.
Would staff like to do a clarification?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Committee Member Ender, what I would just ask is to clarify, the surplus then of the $229,000, is the intent within your motion to keep it within the public safety program area, to allocate that amount either on a weighted basis to the projects or to use it for contingency within the public safety program?
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Do we have a motion? Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Those in favor, please let it be known by saying aye.
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 Opposed? This carries. Next, we're going to talk about streets and storm drainage.
Madam Chair, based on its prior actions with the flexibility, the Executive Committee identified the following projects to recommend to City Council from the Streets and Storm Drainage Subcommittee in the following order: Vision Zero implementation, equity-based transportation mobility, Levine flood mitigation projects, pavement maintenance, Hohokam drainage program, and storm drainage replacement program. The projects total $275,606, below the Executive Committee's approved target of $81,500,000.
Thank you. Comments?
Madam Chair, I move the recommendation of the $81,224,394 as expressed by staff, and would recommend further that the $275,000 be added to the Vision Zero implementation to equal out our recommendation at $81,500,000.
Second.
Second.
Other comments, questions?
I have a question or a comment. I would like to add the Vision Zero projects to the priority list of projects for additional funding. There's been substantial public comment on this. In addition, the Vision Zero projects will create a more sustainable and livable city for us for future generations, but it would also be a more safe city for all of us. That ride and bike in our streets. So if there is any additional funding in this, I recommend we prioritize that as well. And I leave it to the streets department to recommend the priority levels of this, but I remember this is one of the very first areas that we went through, and we didn't cut based on the priorities that the subcommittee had laid out. And I think that's just something for consideration for the executive committee, that we maintain the integrity of the subcommittee process, to really think about the way that the cuts were made to this committee in particular, and retaining more at the top priority items.
Thank you. Did we have a second to this motion?
To my motion,
Second.
Madam Chair. Yeah.
Thank you. Other comments then?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
To that point, I had been mentioning all along here that while we really worked hard to make sure that we represented the subcommittee's wishes, that our conditions changed dramatically when the city manager came out with his recommendations, made a decision, an executive decision that I thought was fair among all of the categories that are here today, that frankly, we're getting a really good deal on those projects in Levine that have a match. And I might add also, Madam Chair, that when it comes to Vision Zero, there's some significant additional funding that is not necessarily being articulated here. That $5 million is coming from the highway user. This is annually, so throughout the entire course of the bond, you're looking at $500 in highway user revenue funding, $3 million from the general fund, and $2 million from T2050. So I think it's important for the public to know that there is an additional $50 million that's being invested in this program, and that the subcommittee also considered that. Thank you.
I have a clarifying question, Madam Chair. Is what you're saying meaning that there is a path to fully funding the Vision Zero projects as originally laid out in the budget that we saw before us just now?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, that is in addition, offline to this recommendation.
Madam Chair, I would ask that same clarifying question for the equity-based program, the prioritized item number 2. Is there a path towards fully funding that based on alternate funding that's been identified?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, the numbers that you see in front of you are static. The numbers that I mentioned are additive, but not completely inclusive. And let me tell you what I mean by that. There is opportunity under the federal act potentially to get additional funding. We just don't know what that is. So we just don't have, we're not clairvoyants here and are able to look into the crystal ball. But to the degree, I know I've received assurances from staff that they will aggressively exploit potential other opportunities that would be able to potentially backfill those numbers.
Thank you. I hope that clarifies. Those additional funds have really made a significant impact on some of these line items. So I think that was great clarification and something for us to keep in mind as we look at the priorities over and above or outside or in addition to the $500 million we're going to be recommending. Thank you. Other comments? Otherwise, I'll call for the vote. Those in favor of this motion, please let it be known by saying aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Opposed? So carried. Thank you. So I'd like the staff to clarify, but I believe now that we have gone through every subcommittee, we are within the range of the goals, the $500 million. So I want to be sure that that's an understanding. And then our discussion or deliberation is going to come back to talk about whether there's any movement of some of the additional funds from one committee to another, or if that will stay in that committee for additional support. And then secondly, making the very top recommendations that we would consider giving to City Council. If there is another path, if there is another way from this committee body, this is what we would recommend. Is that, staff, would you articulate?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. So as we've left it, based off of the motions and actions and the deliberations you just had, we do have two subcommittees that have surplus amounts. I would ask staff to pull that back up on the screen so that the committee can see that. I believe it's for neighborhoods and city services is $385,000, as well as for parks is $75,000. I believe the motion through public safety, the vote included keeping that surplus amount of $229,000 within the public safety program, so we can remove that from the screen. The committee doesn't need to take action on that. And the $238,000 deficit for arts and culture was resolved via motion by allocating those amounts on a weighted basis to the ranked projects. So at this time, the committee has decisions to make on neighborhoods and city services, $385,000 surplus, what the committee would like to do with that amount, as well as on parks and recreation, the $75,000 surplus.
What is the pleasure of the committee?
Madam Chairman.
Madam Wilcox.
If there is the desire on this committee to look at that and possibly fund a project that maybe wasn't as well prepared as the others, but is very necessary, I would ask that the committee consider Parsons Center. It's not anything near what they asked for, but perhaps it's enough to get them started on master planning and coming, back for the second bond. If the committee does not have that desire, then I would ask that the 75 go back into Parks and Recreation and be used for contingency.
Madam Chair, Member Wilcox, I think consistent with what I said earlier, it's such a nominal dollar amount that I don't think it really does anything to elevate the Parsons Center. Plus, I have concerns about whether or not it would be eligible for utilization of bond funds anyway, given the parameters that we have to sit with. So I would recommend, consistent with what Committee Member Butler said, you either keep that and allocate it amongst your other parks programs, or you allocate it to another need somewhere else. And then you just have Parsons on your list of programs that if additional funding becomes available at some point later, here's a list that the council can consider.
I think that's
in that case, I'll follow that direction, but I would ask that Parsons Center be kept on the list of priorities, and perhaps the city could work with Parsons Center to get a final conclusion before it comes to council if it is bond eligible. Because if there's a question of that, I think we should know before it actually gets sent there.
To clarify, the question isn't whether or not a capital project is bond funding eligible. The question is whether or not if we gave them $75,000, if that is big enough to be bond program eligible because of the scope of what the project would be.
You had the threshold of $500,000, did you?
It's not so much a threshold of $500,000. It has to meet useful life. And so if it doesn't meet useful life within the confines of the IRS limitations on bond funding, then it doesn't meet it.
How would you best recommend, Mr. Barton, that this be handled then?
So my suggestion, again, consistent with what Committee Member Butler said, I think you're better served if you take the $75,000 and allocate it amongst your projects within parks, unless you, again, elevate another program someplace else to take that $75,000, and then you just put Parsons on this list of potential projects that if at some later date when council is considering everything, additional funding becomes available, then Parsons is on that list.
That would be my desire. My desire was to highlight Parsons so that the council could make its decision. That is a very big need in our community, and I know the amount of money that we have is very little toward it. So I would continue to work with the council to see if they would consider Parsons, but I would ask that the 75 go back into parks contingency. And the projects that are left in parks are pretty large, so it really wouldn't do hardly anything for the projects that are left, but we could use it for contingency if we had an overrun.
And Madam Chair, just to be clear, because I want to make my CFO happy too, and I know we've got bond counsel that will also opine on some of these things. the easiest thing for us to do now relative to this conversation about contingency is to just take that dollar amount that's left over and allocate it across the entirety of the projects. Because we can't, on the prop, call out just contingency. When we go to the ballot and go to the voters, each project has to be called out specifically. So I can't have a contingency project. My suggestion is just we take the dollars and allocate it across the board, and each project has a smaller contingency embedded within the project cost.
Are you saying across the board within that category of
Correct.
Parks and Recreation?
Correct.
Would that?
That would be fine. Perhaps it could replace some of the money that we took from South Mountain Roads. So,
thank you.
If that was a motion, I'll second it.
that was a motion.
Questions or comments? Those in favor, please let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Aye. So carried.
Madam Chair, Executive Committee.
Chairman James.
Yes. I am very much a supporter of arts and culture. And I think that just us taking this particular amount and placing it into arts and culture overall will be helpful to the city of Phoenix moving forward. That's would be my recommendation regarding this additional money that's available.
Very valuable money. Madam Chair, I guess I would look to the cultural facilities critical equipment replacements, and if we could create that bucket of funding versus putting it towards, or I mean, if we need to spread it across projects for the same reason the city manager described earlier, understood, but to have a bucket when something does reach end of life, HVAC, whatever it might be, to be able to pull from that for whatever is needed most of the time could be really critical to some of our nonprofit organizations.
Madam Chair, consistent with committee members' recommendation, what I would suggest we do, we would just create a lump sum project for capital facility upgrades, and that funding would go there.
Very good. Other comments, questions? Can we have a motion?
Wish I can just say so moved. My motion is to provide the additional funds into, I guess it would be a capital improvement fund for our city moving forward.
We have a second. Other comments?
Committee, sorry to interject. I think what would be helpful to clarify, it's really Project 9 that this additional $385,000 could go into as a lump sum for cultural facilities critical equipment replacements.
Okay. So this would be the cultural facilities critical equipment replacement? Yes. So the $385,339. So that funding would go toward.
We have a revised motion. Second?
Second.
Other comments? Those in favor, please let it be known by saying aye.
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 So moved. Do we have any other surplus dollars to talk about here?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, no, you do not.
So I think now we're at a point where we've solidified the $500 million in our recommendation to City Council, and I think we would like to now deliberate on what are the top 1, 2, 3, 5 projects that this body feels are really critical, feels they've been left out because of the budgetary constraints, but important to the community, so that the City Council can take a look at that, listen to our recommendations, and hear from us on that. So I'd like to open the floor on that topic. Yes.
Sorry, Madam Chair. I don't want to confuse things, but I wanted to know if we could revisit the motion that I made from HH&H and to spread the $299 across the projects 1 through 5 and not 6, keep 6 at 1 million, but spread the 299 across 1 through 5. If I still have an opportunity to do that, I'd like to make that suggestion.
You do have an opportunity to do that if you want to take another vote.
So I'm going to recommend that the 299, whatever that amount is spread through projects 1 through 5. That project 6 is still funded at $1 million, but the 299 allocation is spread through 1 through 5.
Madam Chair, to clarify, I believe that would be projects 1 through 4. So
1 through 4.
Project 5 is the innovation in affordable housing.
All right, sorry, 1 through 4, and that 5 remain the same at 1 million.
And then, Madam Chair, if that motion does pass, that replaces the prior motion.
Second.
Aye.
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 Any other clarifications before we move on to our priority list? Well, first of all, congratulations to everyone for getting us to this point. I'm really pleased about it. I think it was difficult, like we thought it was going to be. I think we pushed the conversations in ways that I was so pleased the city staff could look at additional funding in certain of these major areas. There are a couple of areas that didn't have that opportunity for additional city funding. So as we deliberate now, I might suggest that we look at that, but the floor is open to all of the members to share your thought on some very top priorities. So ultimately, we will take a motion on these priorities as well. Any comments from staff?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, what I would suggest is that what you're about to discuss would be added to the letter that you're going to be drafting to the council. It will have a report attached to it identifying the projects in priority order with associated dollar amounts that you just took action on, as well as then to list other top priority projects that the committee would like the council to consider as they move forward every year in their work or potentially for the next bond program. We do have a list ready. If you would like us to read that list that we've been keeping tabs on as you've been making or having your discussions as a starting point, if you would like.
I think that would be great.
And Madam Chair, the projects that we've heard identified as for consideration for priority are Symphony Hall, energy and water efficiency, heat resiliency, Parsons Center, and Vision Zero.
And Madam Chair, and equity-based transportation, I think, was also in there.
Which one?
Equity-based transportation was also in there, right?
So that is the top list.
Madam Chair, I've got one to add. The Hans project, which I really appreciate what you did to get that $3 million in there as a starter, but I also think since that project was cut so substantially, if we could, get to the full project amount, I would put it below some of these other priorities, but I would still put that on the list. I think it's really important.
Well, I think it's on a list for the moment, and I think we want to talk about that. I think we might be more successful if we're really focused on what this list is, but prioritizing is another way to do that. So I would like to get some comments, particularly from the committee chairman who didn't have the same latitude for additional funding. Maybe talk about that. And I think that would be arts and culture for one.
I apologize. Am I talking about the Hans Park request specifically, or what I would
Arts and
add
culture.
is-
Arts and culture.
Thank you for the opportunity. Absolutely, Symphony Hall, Herberger Theater Center, and bringing that cultural facilities critical equipment replacements back up to $5 million, which again was cut from the original 10. So I'd like to see that brought back to the 5. And just a comment. I know we have I think our co-board chairs here from Symphony. It's because they're without a CEO currently. And to hire a CEO into Symphony, this position, I think it's a very timely comment to share as we're trying to just generate the support and show the support for one of our cultural facilities. So thank you for the opportunity to prioritize Symphony Hall in that way, keeping the leadership we have at Herberger Theater Center, and then of course, allowing performances to go on by having this bucket of funding for some of those emergency repair needs.
Let's just stay on arts and culture for the moment. Any other comments that any of the members would like to make? I would like to say that I think Symphony Hall is really critical for the reasons that the Arts Commission has talked about, but also being involved in the real estate industry myself, keeping buildings that the landlord owns at a good, in good condition is really wise for the city, and so I think it's an important investment from that perspective as well. Okay, Symphony Hall is on our list. Other comments or recommendations?
Chairman, I would like to add the Parsons Center, and I think that's very, very important because we're talking about people's lives and the future needs of a very, very strong community. So I would ask that the Parsons Center go on and staff work to make sure that the presentation from the Parsons Center is a presentable one that could look at funding at the level that would be considered for bonding.
Other comments? Consensus? Great. These are two projects that didn't have any additional opportunity or additional funding, so I think this is great. Number 3?
Madam Chair, I would love that we would place more emphasis on the economic and development and education component of this. Ultimately, we're dealing with climate change issues within our valley and around the world. And I really feel that we should really look at these concerns that we have within our community, and definitely in the less economically advantaged areas of our cities, which are constantly getting hotter, warmer. So I think that would be something that we should finally consider.
Is there a way staff would like that to be a little more specific, or how would you
Madam
recommend?
Chair, Member James, I believe what you're indicating is you'd like to be added to this list, that economic development projects, either identified by the Economic Development and Education Subcommittee, be considered for additional funding. Is that the intent?
Yes, that's the intent.
Okay.
Let's make that number 3 on our list. Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you. I agree with everything. There's just too many things to fund and not enough, but I'd like to just emphasize, I know it was funded, but the energy, water, renewable energy upgrades throughout the city, I just want to add that to the list. I know we're funding that with the bond, but just as other funds come forward, it's just so important, especially where, I live and work. It's just so congested, and I just would love to see more of those projects really continue to move forward. So thank you.
And that's broad. It does go across different sectors as well. So putting that 4 might come in a number of different ways. So I think that's great. Can we settle on these as our recommendations, these 4?
My last recommendation is increasing or funding an additional amount for heat resilience projects. We all know that the city is only going to get hotter, and it's going to affect our most vulnerable residents the most severely. And I think that the city is doing a good job allocating funds on a yearly basis and getting any kind of funds as they come in. However, on a regional-wide perspective, it is very difficult to secure regional grants in this area. And the more that the city can show environmental leadership in this area and pull other municipalities into this, the more that our entire region will be able to, be more resilient and fight against climate change impacts in our communities that affect the health of our residents, our neighbors, and our friends.
Thank you. Can I ask the committee then, or maybe ask the staff if you'd read those top four so we're all clear on what we're talking about here. And then I think we would call for a vote on this recommendation. And again, this will be in a letter that goes along with our bond package recommendation.
Madam Chair, I think we actually have a total of 5, but I want to make sure that the committee absolutely clarifies. So I'll ask Deputy Director Chris Fazio to read that list.
Madam Chair, committee members, we've heard the committee indicate Symphony Hall, energy and water efficiency at city facilities, heat resiliency, Parsons Center, and economic development and education.
Madam Chairman, I think the Parsons Center was second.
Madam Chair,
That's correct.
to that point, didn't we have a list prior to this conversation? I thought that was our starting point. Did I miss something? Because we had the Vision Zero equity-based, that was also part of the original.
Madam Chair, that was mentioned earlier. So we can also add that to the list if that's the will of the committee.
Is that your recommendation?
Madam Chair, I think some others thought that was also part of the list. Also, I think that was the understanding that we were building on. I'll speak for myself, that we were building on the existing list that was already recommended. That's the impression that I got. If anyone on the committee thinks differently, fine. I'm just saying what I...
Yeah, I think we're reprioritizing with this discussion, but to put it on the list, yes.
Madam Chair, if I may, number one, I appreciate the offer to get a little more funding into economic development, but city staff has done a great job of identifying additional funding to address infrastructure, which was the one remaining item. Because we can address that through other means, if there are funds available, I would certainly be willing to have them go in a different direction. As we speak about heat resiliency, we have to remember that while so many of our issues are Phoenix specific, heat is not Phoenix specific. And so there are a number of other entities, municipalities, ASU, APS, SRP, who are also working on this issue and have funding to support it. So we should keep that in mind as well, that this is not a heavy lift for the city of Phoenix only.
What would your recommendation be in light of those comments?
Keeping in mind that there may be an ability to collaborate with others that may affect how much funding we need.
Perhaps they could be prioritized at a lower level. It still shows the interest and the importance of the topic from this committee. So we keep them on the list, but maybe we reprioritize.
So, Madam Chair, members of the committee, what would be helpful is if we can restate what the areas are and then ask the committee to prioritize them so it's very clear. So right now we have Symphony Hall, we have energy and water, we have heat resiliency, the Parsons Center, Vision Zero, equity-based transportation, and economic development.
Madam Chair, it sounded like the chair of economic development just wanted to take that, or was recommending that we take that one off of the prioritized list. Could you please clarify?
Yeah, I think we can take economic development off of that list. And then my suggestion would be to move Parsons up above the heat resiliency.
And then, Madam Chair, I wanted to second that. I believe that the Vision Zero should remain on the list, and I thought that we had already placed that on the list from the get-go.
From a priority perspective, Phoenix Symphony, Parsons Center, what would number 3 be?
I don't have them memorized.
Madam Chair, may I make a recommendation that we take the lot of them and say they're all pretty darn important, and that we let the council sort of parse that out internally? I'm just throwing it out because I think we'll be here a while, because I feel very strongly about Vision Zero and equity-based transportation, because we took a major hit. My subcommittee accounted for 50% of the entire cut across the board. The entire cut from the original recommendation, 50%. So my recommendation would just be, okay, let's not necessarily prioritize. Let's give them this group and go from there. That's my recommendation. It's not a motion, it's just a recommendation.
Let's just have a comment, some discussion about that. I do think it would be helpful for the city council to hear some priority from this committee, and maybe that priority could be around committees that couldn't receive additional funding from the city or from the government or from ARPA, that kind of thing, versus others that were enhanced by other funding. I mean, when you look at arts and culture, it didn't have another way to go. And there are some others in that category, the healthcare category.
Just a suggestion as we're determining process. We use the SurveyMonkey, the survey process in our subcommittee in order to rank the prioritized projects once we identified which we felt should be prioritized. If that's something that we could do through email, that could be probably our most efficient way to get to a list of prioritized projects based on these recommendations.
Other thoughts on that?
Madam Chairman, I don't think we're that far from it.
I don't either.
I think Symphony and Parsons, in my mind, are projects that didn't have that funding you're talking about. And Parsons affects a health issue, which nothing else except the issue health center addressed. So I think if we could put Symphony, Parsons, and then the others as priorities, not in any order, but maybe the other three, because they're issues that they're really going to have to look and see where they want to fund, maybe even create projects. I would like to see that.
I think that's a good recommendation, as is yours. I think we need to eventually vote on this. Devin?
I would just have one more addition to that list, and if we're looking at those without alternate funding, the Herberger Theater Center, I did mention earlier as another critical needs project that if we're including Symphony, would like to see the Herberger also included. But again, our subcommittee, the Arts and Culture Subcommittee, prioritized Symphony higher than the Herberger.
Yes. I think that's what we're trying to do here.
Madam Chair, I sit as one of the general members, so I don't have a particular subcommittee category that I focus on necessarily. And I listened to lots of the subcommittee meetings online, which was very helpful. Appreciate all the chairs' tough process. I concur with Mary Rose that the Symphony and the Parsons Center are both really critical projects that should be sort of prioritized by us because they're completely unfunded. Some of these other areas are areas where we are moving the ball forward, but not getting there. And since Symphony is the highest unfunded project in the arts, and Parsons Center, I think, is just unique in the whole program, and that committee took a huge cut. I agree with Member Wilcox that it really, those two really maybe stand out among the field. And so I don't know if you'd like a motion. I would try to do that, to make a motion to prioritize those two projects as the highest priority next to be funded recommended projects from this overall body. I'll try that as a motion.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor.
Second.
Second. Other discussion? Those in favor, please let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
So moved. Well, I think we have direction to staff on what we'd like to do in terms of the additional recommendation for funding if there's an opportunity or a priority, so that the City Council can understand what has been important. This has been an amazing process. There have been more than 1,000 citizens, staff could tell us, who have weighed in on this project. And I think that's been so impressive. And people coming here to talk, and all of the hours that the committee chairman, subcommittees put into this, I think has been a remarkable process. And then to the city staff, all of you have been on top of all of this. We've made you kind of do math here right in front of us. That's always makes everybody nervous. I think it's been a super process, and so I've been proud to be a part of it. I've loved working with everyone who's been a part of it as well. So we, I think, are in a position ready to go. Have I missed anything?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, no, staff is clear on the direction. I just want to take a moment to thank all of you, actually the entire GO Bond subcommittee process, including all of our subcommittee members. It's been quite an experience. I know it's taken a lot of time. I know that it took a lot of difficult decision making, but thank you so much for your guidance and your leadership and for arriving today at decisions that we can advance to the City Council. If you could just let me, just for a moment, indulge me, I have to say thank you to several city departments who really helped to facilitate this entire process in the meetings, including staff from our information technology department, city clerk, communications, public works, and my team and budget and research. Everyone in my team helped with this process, and I just want to say I truly appreciate it. And last but certainly not least, our city manager's office leadership team, all of our deputy city managers, assistant city manager, and Jeff Barton, our city manager. So thank you to everyone for having a successful committee process.
Thank you.
And Madam
very
Chair,
much.
if
Yes.
I may, I also want to take the time to thank each and every one of you. This has been a very arduous task. You're trying to undo something that took us 16 years to get here. I mean, it's been a really long haul and a heavy load on your shoulders. However, I think you have now set the starting point moving forward. So you've laid the cornerstone to what will ultimately be the Phoenix of tomorrow with this bond program that you're moving forward, and the process and the strategy that we're adopting as we move ahead over the next 2 decades. That's the vision, and you guys were front and center as we navigate that process. So I want to thank you for all that hard work. I know this wasn't easy. These decisions are hard, and some it's a little restless decision because you want to fund everything, and unfortunately we can't. But I want to thank you. I want to thank our citizens for participating. This is what makes Phoenix unique. Other cities don't have this level of community involvement, this level of community feedback and input, and now our council gets to make the final decision on moving this forward. But I'm hopeful that come November 23, when this moves forward to our voters, that we've got a very, very good bond program to put forward. Thank you.
Great. Any other comments before final announcements and closing the meeting?
Madam Chair, thank you for your leadership. It's been great. Thank you. The way you handled us was perfect. Okay, wait a minute. You were great. Anyway, I just want to let you know, I've served on a lot of committees, and your demure was really excellent, and want to thank you for keeping things nice and civil here, because they could have easily gone sideways, and you kept us on track. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that very much. I'm really proud that we've completed our work here today. We are not going to have our meeting on Thursday. We don't need to do that. And then December 13th will be when we'll be submitting this to the City Council. It will be at a council meeting, so that is our next step. So with that, I'm going to adjourn this meeting and say I'm in awe of everybody who's been a part of it. Thank you very much.